G'day guys, today I have a super interesting interview planned for you all. I'm going to be talking to Mel. Mel is a gringa, or woman from the US, who moved to Medellin 5 years ago when she was 23, met a guy online while she was over there, moved over here, started dating him, and almost instantaneously moved in with him. But not just him. She moved in with his whole family as well. So we're going to talk a bit about that, plus some other crazy cultural differences and experiences she's had while living here with her boyfriend's family. Mel, first of all, thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Can you just let everybody know, first of all, where you're from and how you ended up in Medellin?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Flint, Michigan, where I was born and raised. I then went to college in Michigan. So I've really only ever lived in Michigan and Medellin. I basically graduated from college, wasn't really sure what I was doing with my life. And then about a year and a half, 2 years out of college, almost 2 years out of college, made the decision to come down and visit. I went back home to start a job, and then I ended up making the decision to not go in on the first day of work and move down here.
Out of all the places you could have chosen, what made you want to come to Medellin?
I was interested in learning Spanish, and that's actually the first time I had thought about anything related to Colombia, and it was because on Reddit, I just looked up best ways to learn Spanish, Reddit, and folks were like, well, I would focus on one accent, and the accents that they recommended that were just very neutral and pretty easy for non-Spanish speakers to hear quickly were the accents from Bogota and from Medellin. That's sort of how my interests in coming in to Colombia started.
Can you tell me how it went from you coming here to learn Spanish to you moving in with your boyfriend's parents?
We actually met via Hello Talk, a language learning app. We met before I'd even set foot in Colombia. He was on the app, and like I said, I was looking for people from Medellin or from Bogota. So we had started chatting, and we'd become friends. Nothing more than that, we were just friends. And then after I'd been here for a while, romance started to develop. So I got here and I had a roommate. And so I moved in and was living with her, and it was going well. After about 2 months, it wasn't working out with the roommate. And so she kind of alluded to you need to find another place to stay, which was very nerve-wracking at the time because I was I don't know where I'm going to stay. I'd actually met my future suegra. I'd met her as his girlfriend probably a couple of weeks before my roommate was like, hey, you got to find somewhere else. And she just offered. She was like, why don't you come live here?
And how long had you guys been together at that point?
Less than a month.
How did you feel at this point? You just got together with this guy you met online. You're in the very early stages of your relationship, and suddenly you're about to move in, not just with him, but his whole family.
I don't think I realized what I was getting into to some extent, which is probably why I was like, okay. And also I felt like I didn't have a ton of options. I wasn't sure how the process of getting an apartment here worked. I definitely didn't have money for the gringo priced Airbnbs. I wasn't in a position where I could just I'll just figure it out. I needed to know where I was going. And even though I had a job, I was making pesos. So it wasn't a huge secure amount of money I was making. I think at the time it was 2,800,000 pesos a month.
Okay, so you moved in. What was your daily life like? You had some stories about things your mother-in-law did that was kind of weird and shocked you. Do you mind sharing those with us, Mel?
My suegra definitely has treated me to some extent like a daughter and not like her son's partner, which is great for getting close to the culture and feeling like I've had someone that cares about me in that way here. But it also came with, I think, some of the realities of what moms in Medellin can be like. And not every mom, obviously, but I've definitely seen this in a lot of different scenarios with girlfriends, where there's just pretty outward criticisms of one's appearance. You should do this because you look better, or you feel better, or you'd fit in better is really what's happening. It definitely comes from a good place, I think. And it's got history too. I mean, the Narcos history here is part of what has caused some of the beauty standards that you'll see and the way that they get carried out in women's lives.
Do you know there's a term for that? Yeah, there is. It's called narco-aesthetic, as in aesthetic, the perception of beauty, and narco-traficantes, drug dealers, because that's how the narcos, they like their women to look. Very done up with all the plastic surgery, a lot of makeup and things like that. So you get narco-aesthetic. It's actually a term. You can look it up.
And I think it even trickles down, to the women who don't fully embody it, but it's still you know, it finds its way everywhere. So to give an example, naturally I have somewhat curly hair. I had never thought about it though as like, oh, I've got curly hair, especially because I'm from like a predominantly black area in the US. So in my mind, I've got like still got white girl hair. It's not like curly in that sort of sense. But when I got here, I remember his mom telling me like, oh, I made you a keratin appointment, an alisado appointment here, which is just like chemically straightening it. Mm-hmm. She was like, you're going to feel so much better. Like, it's going to be great. And I was like, no, I don't. Well, and I struggled to figure out how to respond because on the one hand, like my response, if someone in the US had done that would be like, get out of my life. Like, what are you doing? But on the other hand, I was very conscious, and I think that's why it's worked out for me living here. But I was very conscious of like, I'm in a different culture. I'm in a different environment. She clearly thinks this is like a kind thing that she's done. And it's definitely not come from a place of like, I think your hair's ugly. It came from a place of like, everyone wants straight hair. So of course I can do you a favor by helping you out with this.
That's hilarious, but definitely could have been looked at as very offensive if you said that to, you know, someone in the US or other parts of the world. But now let's move on. Let's talk about safety. And then we're going to hear about some of the issues you had when building friendships with locals. So safety, you know, this is a huge issue for everybody who comes to Medellin. And there's a kind of different paradox going on here in Medellin that's unlike any other city in the world. I think you'd agree with me. Most places in the world are much more dangerous for women than for men. But as everybody knows, I dare say, Medellin is much, much, much more unsafe for men than women. What are your thoughts on that?
I guess I'll start by saying that like my experience has been one where no one has ever thought I was a gringa, which is important. So I think a lot of like, especially where I was living with his family, the perception of like a gringa was like someone that was tall and blonde and blue-eyed and very, very clearly like, oh, this is like my like American Pie version of what like a US American woman looks like.
Okay, so your situation's a bit different since you're not blonde with blue eyes and you speak Spanish. But what about women that fit that, you know, traditional gringa profile? Should they be worried about coming to Medellin?
I've seen in like the expat women's groups, I've seen posts from mostly blonde white women about feeling really unsafe here. I don't know if this is like controversial to say, but I do feel like sometimes that persona has an already clouded view of Latin America as dangerous. And I think it contributes to how they perceive. I've never had any friends that are Spanish speakers come down and be like, oh, it's brutal. I feel really unsafe.
So you're talking about pre-framing here. That's when the way that someone thinks about a situation affects their actual experience in that situation, right? So people come in with their stereotypes of what the country should be like, and immediately they're looking around for, oh my God, this is dangerous, that's dangerous. Is that what you're talking about?
Definitely. I mean, as an example, not related to women, but just in general, Chris and I, my boyfriend's name is Chris, we went to London last year, almost exactly a year ago. And we saw like a knifing and like a couple of robberies and street fights. And I remember him being like, what are these people talking about that Medellin is so unsafe? It's framing in a lot of ways because like I've given the example sometimes in those expat women's groups when I'm like feeling a bit defensive of Colombia when they're kind of saying it's really dangerous. There's like a mass shooting or a stabbing or terrorist acts in cities like London or New York or Paris. And somehow those cities don't become like this like representation of danger. People are still like, oh, well, I still want to go, of course. Like, you got to be careful, but yeah, I'm going. It doesn't become like the full image of what the place is. And so it's weird even with the amount of things that happen here. I would say not much different than any major city that the perception is still so, oh my gosh, you have to be very careful there. You never know what's going to happen. And that's everywhere. That's traveling.
I've actually reviewed the stats on crime in the US versus Medellin, and there's a list of cities that have higher crime rates than Medellin, right? The cities in the US I'm talking about. And right at the top of that list is your city?
Probably both cities I lived in, probably both Flint and Detroit.
Okay, so you're probably like, God damn, please send me to Medellin. Anywhere's better than this shit.
Yeah, I think that's also probably my perspective, is that it's like, well, I grew up in like, I got robbed on the way to school a couple times when I was in like, just thinking that like, okay. But I will say, I do mention it in our tours sometimes, and we've had some comments where people are like, are you sure we're safe? Like, I see like shady looking people walking around, which again, perspective. It's like, these are people that live in this neighborhood walking around. Sometimes I'll say to them, I'll be like, yeah, I mean, this is a really safe area, but at least we don't have to worry about mass shootings, which is usually a nice way to like close that conversation.
Hey, you just touched on it before. Before we get on to the next topic of relationship with Colombians, can you just tell us a bit more about your tours and what they offer?
Yeah, absolutely. On the weekends, my partner and his cousin and I do street food tours here in Envigado, and we talk a lot about the history of Envigado specifically. All of our stops are local. The food is local. We talk about the history of a lot of very popular Colombian food like the empanada or the patacon. Yeah, and we get to like promote a lot of cool little businesses. Our last stop on the tour is a 9-year-old pastry chef here in Envigado. And so we get to highlight, I think, some cool local businesses and go through some history and hang out. It's about 3 hours, and it's on Fridays and Saturdays.
If you guys want to do that tour, check the link in the description. You can get in contact with Mel and come check out her Envigado street food tour. Mel, I got another question for you. This one's a bit personal, so you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but I want to give you some context first, okay? So I was at a birthday party in the hills of Envigado a few weeks ago, and there I met a Polish girl. This girl had been living in Medellin since about 2018. She was in love with the city, but she was leaving. And I said, why are you leaving if you love it so much? And she said her main problem was dating. Dating for a woman doing well is almost impossible in this city, she said. This girl from Poland in particular, she was a high-level coder working for a Swiss company and earning in Swiss francs or euros, one of those. Her problem was that every single guy that she would meet here in Colombia, because the wage is much lower, she'd be making like 10x what they'd make. And there's a weird dynamic in the relationship that way. Many guys, as you know, Colombia is a very machista culture. Guys are like, yeah, I'm a man, I got to provide and all this shit. So they would kind of get offended by that. It wouldn't work out. And even if she did find a date with someone, she ended up having to either pay for everything or downgrade her lifestyle so that she could get on the same level as what the guys could afford to pay. So she had had enough of that, and she's like, I got to go back to Europe. This is not working for me. Has that also been your experience while you were dating your boyfriend?
So I would say yes, to some extent. I think it depends, though, how the person perceives it. So, like, when I met my boyfriend, he was still in school. Like, he definitely was making no money, but I was also making very little money, so it was fine. Then there was also a period in our relationship where he was, like, trying to transition into, like, a more tech field, and I was definitely paying for everything, like, almost everything. I guess it depends on the person. In my mind, I don't look at it as, or I didn't look at it, at least at the time, as downgrading my lifestyle, in the sense that I think my lifestyle is pretty not extravagant, even when I started making good money. And I also think I got very lucky because I know sometimes gringos talk about like the machismo here, and just like it's hard to date a guy who's okay with that. But I always give this as an example. When I was making, you know, all of the money and he wasn't able to contribute much to like our household, I didn't like wash a single item of clothing. Like I didn't clean anything. Like we had like a very reversed sort of relationship for a minute. Yeah, I mean, it worked out for us in that sense. And to be fair, I would say I didn't downgrade my lifestyle. I think I just like added him to it. So I just looked at it as like, I care for this person offers me a lot of what I feel like, at least in my experience dating in the US, I couldn't get from a partner in terms of like affection and care and things that aren't as common, at least in US culture, that it felt like a fine trade-off for me. And I just sort of tried to help him get into the tech area that he's in now. And yeah, now he's a developer and we split everything. So we ended up getting to that place.
Nice. That's an amazing story. Congratulations first to you for for holding it down and supporting your man when he was sorting out his life. And two, big props to him for accepting your help and not being all super macho, like women are beneath me, how dare she pay for things and all this bullshit, you know? But well done. I'm really happy that you guys figured it out and you're able to help each other like a true partnership should be, right?
I think where at least it's affected me more and been difficult is with friendships more than relationships. Now that I make good money, my capabilities to like have a fun weekend, like what that entails is different than like my average Colombian friend. And so it's more a matter of just like, oh yeah, well, I'll just like adjust how we hang out and we'll just hang out in a normal way that doesn't require like a ton of money. I think a lot of gringos end up in the situation where they either have to downgrade their lifestyle or start paying for people.
Hey Mel, let's move on. Give us your top 3 tips for anybody looking to move here long term.
I remember I went to the moment I realized where it was like I was learning Spanish, but where I realized like, okay, like I need to take this up to another level. Like I won't stay here if I can't, is I needed to go to the doctor, and Chris would come with me to do certain things just in case. I'd be like, just come with me just in case I miss something and it's important or I'm not sure what to do. And so he'd come with me, and so he went with me to this doctor's appointment. And as soon as the doctor heard my accent, I'd been here maybe like 6 or 7 months at the time, he started asking Chris questions about me. And especially in the context of like, he was asking about like my bowel movements. I was like, F this. I absolutely need to take control of my life. Like I'm not living like this. So learning Spanish is number 1. I think if you want to have the kind of life that feels fulfilling here, you'll need it. And I also think you'll need it to understand some of the things that end up being frustrating or like culturally confusing. You need it as a base, number 1, without a doubt.
Okay, learn Spanish is number 1. Give us your number 2 tip for visiting or living in Colombia.
Be responsible and conscious about the move itself. As of recent, there's a lot more discourse on like Colombian media about the negative effects of gringos being here and of like gentrification and things that are of concern. And I think not only should you want to like take care of the place you're moving to, but it benefits all of us to like go about things in a responsible way. And by that, I mean like do your research. Don't pay for a place that's $1,800 a month if that's not what you should be paying for that place. And I don't think the responsibility is only on gringos. I think a lot of it is on the government and just the way they've gone about like the digital nomad visa and certain things. But doing as much as you can to get familiar with how things work here and assimilating as much as you can to things. Sometimes I'll see gringos that really complain about how things work here. To some extent, if you live here, of course you're gonna have complaints, but sometimes it's like, dude, you moved here by choice. Like, get with the program, or you don't have to get with it at all. Like, you can leave if you don't like it.
So number 1 is learn Spanish. Number 2 is assimilate the best you can. What's number 3, Mel?
I think it's really important to get here with an open mind. Coming in with no expectations and kind of letting Colombia surprise you.